on this computer. I'll just do that. Okay. So, okay, so let's workshop. So now we share and we're back and we've got that. Okay. So who's got the first I argue something that they want to talk about? Uh, who is it? Who is it? Go for it. Who's that? Is that Ananya? I need somebody with a face. So it's either Ananya, Wenkong, or Dingy. Who wants to give me a thesis statement to workshop? Somebody?
I'm still working around mine for now.
Let's
Sorry.
workshop it. Give me something to work with. What are we? I argue affects. What do you want to say? Would you pick emotional labor, emotional taxation, emotional habitus, or emotional oppression?
Emotional oppression.
Oppression. So let's just write it this way. Emotional oppression. And what does it do to cause a yes vote in Redfern? So this is the yes vote in Redfern. Is it emotional oppression or is it? I just wonder for the yes vote, it's going to be a little bit different, right? So it could be the emotional tax. Is the emotional taxation the same in Redfern as it is in Lingiari? So Redfern has an indigenous population of 1.4%, and Lingiari has a Aboriginal population of 44%. So that's like a valid question to see if a difference in population numbers reflects a difference in the emotional quotient that they're gonna have to deal with. So what are our options? So we've got, let's just do it this way. So I argue affect, let's do emotional taxation. What else do we have? I argue affect emotional labor, and I argue emotional affect emotional habitus. Okay. So now if it was me and I was looking at these four things on a yes vote, right? So this is yes, 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 yes. Then my guess is that the one that's easiest, we'll start easy and we'll get harder, okay? Is probably emotional habitus, right? Just because, so emotional habitus is defined as the constellation of emotions that you feel about an issue and the political trajectory that that includes, right? So the yes vote in it, we're talking about in Redfern, a historic indigenous site, the expectation for that, the emotional expectation would have been high, right? And I'm not saying that it wasn't high in Lingiari. We haven't gotten there yet. We're just looking at yes. So we've got emotional habitus. So yes would be, so what's the emotion? So it would be, what's the emotion that Aboriginal people might have felt in Lingiari? Hopeful, maybe? Hope and change, hopey, changey type. So hope. Okay. And then the trajectory in Redfern is high, right? They think it could be achieved. So now we've got that. Okay, so let's just put that there for a minute. And let's see what happens. Now I've got to argue salience. So how salient was the yes vote in Redfern, right? So indigenous vote in an indigenous historic site is pretty high. So I'm going to argue that there's high salience in Redfern, okay? Then I'm going to look at policy entrepreneur. So let's just do this for, I think it's here in my slide. One second, let me look real quick. So there was a, oh, maybe it's at the front. Sorry, let me look. I put it here, right here. So it was the Oh, and I put this here to help you. Did everybody see this? Maybe I'll put it into a thing. 1 second. Okay, there's that. And then I had this, which is about this. Let's open a thing for that. And 1 second, we'll do that. Okay. So if we look at, do we have a second here? Can I put on the video real quick? Can everyone see this? Okay, let's watch it and see what it says.
Sydney's Redfern is famous for the Aboriginal civil rights movement. From protests and struggle to Paul Keating's landmark Redfern speech.
We committed the murders. We took the children from their mothers.
Donna Ingram grew up around Redfern and remembers attending Aboriginal rights rallies as a girl, but how the neighbourhood has changed.
And this is where I feel my cultural connections are. It's all shiny and
That sounds like emotional habitus to me, doesn't it?
It's
Yeah.
still the block, but not as I know it, not as I knew it.
Yeah,
Donna will be voting yes.
obviously having it in the constitution, it can't be changed because I think people deserve to be heard.
But she said some in the community have their doubts.
One of the big ones is people feel that sovereignty will be ceded. I think another big one is distrust of government as a whole. Obvious, for obvious reasons.
If the polling is correct, Australia's most populous state could be headed towards the No campaign held its official launch in Western Sydney, population 2 million.
I think it's particularly important here in Western Sydney. I've argued that as a nation, we shouldn't be divided. We shouldn't be creating separate classes of people in this country.
No campaigner Warren Mundine has told 730 they're focusing on migrant communities, tradies and the working class. Former federal Liberal candidate Pradeep Pathi
Sir.
is a volunteer with the No campaign.
Want some information about the voice? It's risky.
We multiculturals when we come here, we see one thing, that is everyone should be equally treated. Why can't we use the present infrastructure and the resources to utilize a betterment of fixing that gap, rather dividing the nation?
More information about the voice, which is risky and unknown.
Western Sydney and the outer suburbs have lots of undecided and swinging voters in marginal
Risky and
electorates.
unknown.
Many Pradeep hopes will vote at the last minute.
Last 1 week is crucial. That's the time before the polling. That's the time they're going to take a decide.
And they're the voters you want to influence.
That's the voters, it's important for us.
Have you made up your mind about how you're going to vote?
Not really. I kind of like the whole idea, but there's too much that I don't know.
Okay, so that is really, I'm gonna stop for a second just so I can, isn't that interesting? Like, I think that's a really important, it gets to this. So we were just talking a minute ago. 1 second, let me just look in the chat and see if I'm missing anything. I cannot listen clearly. Not sure if it's just me. Can other people hear me okay? Declan, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, so I can hear your voice. It was just the video. Probably the audio just was at certain
Okay.
points wasn't coming through clear, but that's all good.
Okay. All right. Well, the link to the video is already in the slides from this week. So if people want to, it's only 2 minutes long. So if people want to read it, they certainly can. Listen to it, they certainly can. Let me just look at the 1 second. I'm gonna share one more time. I know I'm going back and forth here. Okay, so we go that. And now can people see this? The slide? Did that work? No? Okay, 1 second. New share. Here we go. How's that?
Yeah, that's good. That's good.
Yeah.
All right, so here we are, and we're talking about, let me just do that, just to make it nice and easy. So we had basically 4 options, right? We had affect is emotional oppression, affect, emotional taxation, emotional labor, and emotional habitus. And we said we were going to look at this one for now, just to give it a starting point. So we'll look at emotional habitus because it was hopeful. Although I don't know there was a lot of hope in that video, but there's something there for yes. And then so we agreed, at least for Redfern, there it's highly salient as a historic site. Then it comes into the question, so it's affect, salience, policy entrepreneurship. Who's the policy entrepreneur in that video? Was it Donna Ingram or was it Jacinda Price or Warren Mundine? I mean, it's up to you. You've got to pick one. I would say, again, I'm not saying it as if I wrote the paper. I'm saying it as somebody who's just watched the video. Jacinda Price was one of the leading no vote people, and she got more play than Donna Ingram did. So let's say Price, and we're just workshopping. So we've got emotional habitus, high salience, and Jacinda Price. And what's the causal story in Redfern? Historic sites. Yeah, go for it, Declan.
Is a sort of causal story like basically that because we talk about like causal stories like a political instrument that's used to sort of like reaffirm sort of establishing or existing political structures such, and that in that sense would be sort of what's like in Redfern sort of available resources or what's already sort of available as such in
So what was it in Redfern, I guess, is the specific question I'm looking for. So in the video we saw, somebody was saying it was risky and unknown. Somebody was saying it's historic and would lead to sovereignty, right? So that it was sort of, because that's the way that Uluru Statement from the Heart is written, that you go voice treaty was the sovereignty was the order. So history would lead to sovereignty. So if we got to ask a few questions. Okay, so let's just put that there and leave it there for a minute. Okay. We've got the role of Redfern in First Nations life. What were some things that came up in the video? Medine, did you catch the video at all?
I heard something about symbolic for the Aboriginal.
Yep. So one of the ways that it's symbolic is it's been sort of the site of civil rights for Indigenous Australians for about 50 years, recently. But it also included the Paul Keating talk when Paul Keating was Prime Minister of, okay, somebody needs to muted. So Paul Keating was the Prime Minister of Australia, and he gave a speech at Redfern. It's the most famous speech that's ever been given at Redfern. So I'm putting that in here. So now I've got symbolic, and I've done that. Let's just put that there. And what's the problem and what are the penalties that I'm looking at in this essay?
I think there was some mention about the distrust in the government.
Distrust the government. Yep. Anything else?
Also sort of concerns that it's sort of what the referendum was not as clear or the
Unclear, not sure what it's going to do, and that sort of plays into the risky and unknown thing that they were saying up there in the no campaign. Maybe I'll move that down, and we'll move that from there, and we'll put it here. So now we've got, and that was sort of under a causal story as well, that it's risky or unknown versus that. So there's some relationship there between the problem to be solved in the causal story. So problem identification. Okay, what's the penalty in Redfern for a yes vote? Remember, we're trying to figure out why Redfern votes yes and why Lingiari is going to vote no, but let's just focus on the yes. what are the penalties that are involved?
That if the vote was essentially successful, but comparatively didn't succeed in the nationwide, that might cause more disempowerment within Redfern, essentially.
Disempowerment, okay, got it. What else? Who else? Wing Kong? Hello, how are you?
Hi, I'm good. It's just I can't think of another, like, apart from what Declan
No,
has.
well, let's workshop it for a second. So if I'll use marriage equality as an example, right? So for me, remember Julie Gillard's position was that she was just against marriage. So, it could be that it's disempowering, or it could be that if it's successful, it stops progress, right? So maybe people feel that if it's successful, then you lose. So by winning, you actually lose. So winning is losing. Okay. And it's sort of the institutional, right? Like there's this old line. One second, Elijah, I'm just going to mention one quick thing and then I'll get to you. There's this old line that came out of the research on micro grants for women in Africa around coffee beans and farming for coffee beans. And the line was that if you think capitalism can solve the problem of poverty in Africa, you're drinking the wrong coffee, because there is a legitimate point to be made, right? That capitalism is not the solution to every problem in the world. And so from their point of view, government may not be the solution. And for Aboriginal Australians, government is usually the problem, not the solution. So, that could be the causal story. That could be one of the causal stories. And it's here, and we had it in the thing, but it's this distrust of government. So let me put it in here. Government is the problem, not the solution. Okay. All right, Elijah.
Thanks, Chris. And yeah, just alongside that, I suppose I was going to reflect on that. Yeah, there is this sense of distrust of government, and that government is not the solution, but also that what is proposed would be a step backwards in terms of this issue of sovereignty. So what is presented as a solution is actually, there is a view that it would be something that would compromise sovereignty even further.
Now, that's a really good point, and I think it's valid, right? These are all valid points. I just want to make sure that we stay focused on that we've got, and we'll get there on the no vote in Lingiari, right? And I think this is all good to keep. I just want to keep us focused that we're analyzing the emotional variables and why Redfern votes yes. Now that doesn't mean that there isn't some connective tissue between the two. There clearly is, but we've got to figure out why Redfern voted yes. Declan.
I was just going to say, in relation to, it also has the propensity to cause further disconnect between Indigenous Australians living within sort of more cosmopolitan regions as such, and cause more infighting in the Indigenous Australian community.
That's true. I'm going to keep us really narrowly tailored here to figuring out the yes, because I think you all know the no, right? We live the no. They voted no. We know the results, but we've got to sort of go back in time a bit. Dylan.
Yeah, I'm noticing that all the discussions we're having kind of end up in an argument for why they voted no. So what you said, kind of going back to why we're voting yes, I'm trying to think of all these penalties and stuff keep leading towards a no vote. So it almost seems like the Lingiari argument is much easier. But with Redfern, I guess I'm trying to think from like that causal story perspective. If it's a site of such a historic and symbolic area where Paul Keating made this speech, maybe there's a sense of unity within the community that they want to represent the Aboriginal people. And if Redfern votes yes, that's a big sign that the whole country should vote yes. And it's, they're quite a representative community, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point. Can I extrapolate on that for a second, Dylan? So if Redfern had voted no, does that matter more than Lingiari voting no? You know what I mean? I think you could make, I mean, Lingiari's got a lot of, just from a historical basis. So, you know, Vincent Lingiari and that whole area that includes Uluru, and it's enormously important. But again, remember, it's not about whether it's important. It's about whether or not it fits into a mental heuristic that people refer to, right? So Uluru doesn't have its own electorate. It is the electorate of Lingiari, which is one of the newest, I think it is the newest electorate in Australia, is Lingiari. So Redfern is not the newest. It is an old electorate, right? Old Box, City of Sydney, old Boots, and has a more and has a history around police violence, around lots of things. So it does, Dylan sort of just made a really important point though, right? If Redfern had voted no, would that have been seen as more emotionally traumatizing and difficult for the country than if Redfern votes yes? And I think we could probably make a guess that that is true, that would have been really difficult for the country. So maybe the penalty there is that Redfern had to vote yes, right? Redfern had to vote yes. Let's just put it
And I
that way.
think just expanding on that, Chris, as well, when you look at location, right? If Redfern votes no, Redfern is, you know, surrounds all these inner city electorates and the wealthy electorates next to Wentworth and everything. So there's almost this spillover effect. So that's almost the penalty for
Yep.
Albanese, that if Redfern don't vote yes, the other electorates in the Sydney and around that, they see that and they go, oh, okay, I'm not going to vote yes either. So it's almost like one electorate voting no could mean the whole of Sydney votes no.
Right, that's right. Oh, so that's another one. So we would have lost, and who would have lost if they had lost Sydney? Like who would have faced the biggest penalty if Sydney had been lost?
I think Sydney by itself, I mean, it would have probably put a lot more like blowback on the state government, might have
I don't think
especially.
Chris Minns was nobody's arguing that Chris Minns was the policy entrepreneur though for
Yeah,
the
true.
yes vote. You know what I mean? He just
Yeah.
wasn't. That was a new, that government was like 6 days old. So who would have lost the most if Sydney voted no?
I
Well,
guess it's also hard to look past Albanese considering he grew up in the electorate right next to it.
I think that's right. Albo's from Merrickville. He's in Stanmore. He's right over here. So it's a reasonable then assumption to say that Albo, Prime Minister Albanese, we'll just say Prime Minister Albo, would have paid the biggest penalty. So then we would expect him to motivate the policy process in order to protect himself. Because it's one thing to lose the voice. It's another thing to lose Redfern, right? For those of you who are from Australia, that is quite would be an emotional, that might be a line we couldn't cross. Declan?
I also want to, I mean, look, I know this probably might just be a more of a local blowback for a local policy entrepreneur, but considering the proximity, like where Sydney University is located to Redfern, now Sydney University in their, like they put forward like the benefits of the voice, but they didn't actually sort of get behind it as such. So, I mean, as given the fact that a lot of, you know, people who work and who attend Sydney University are from, who live in Redfern essentially, that would be probably a blowback. It could be potentially a blowback on Sydney University as, I mean, not quite, but
Could
it
have
just
been, but I think that's a harder, I don't, Sydney University wasn't elected by anybody. So, and it's hard, it's big, it's bureaucratic, it's hard to attribute a penalty to a 75,000 student university with a, you know, I think that's harder. I think all the arguments you make are real. I think the identification of a penalty associated with those is harder. The penalty for Albo as a local member for Sydney in the electorate of Sydney, losing Redfern as the prime minister is at the top of the pyramid. And I think Sydney Uni is somewhere that's harder to figure out. But because remember, the blame game is easy. Anybody can point at the prime minister and say, you're to blame. It's not clear who you're blaming if you're blaming Sydney. But okay, so this is one way to think about. Now let's pause here, right? Because we're talking about penalty and what we wanted to figure out, and you can see we've like learned a lot here in the 25 minutes we've been chatting. So then the question is, so what is this? This is a high emotion, high threshold? Is it high emotion, low threshold? Is it high affect? What box is it? 1 second, let me just bring up the box. That box. So is it high affect, high threshold, or we were talking in class that it's definitely high affect. I think that's pretty reasonable. So, and we were also saying, actually, sorry, I'm going to rewind. We said it was high threshold because 50 plus 1 is a high threshold plus a majority of the states and a majority of the people in a majority of the states is a high threshold. So we're somewhere in this over here, right? Which one is it? If the penalty is elbow for a yes, then what is it? What's it nearest to? It's a hard question. That's why we're having a workshop. I mean, they always talk about indigeneity and Aboriginal rights is like a really tough original sin of Australian colonization. I think it's true, but I don't know exactly where you would put it in here. Or if you're solving the problem of inequality against Aboriginal Australians and Torres Strait Islanders, is it closer to amorphous climate change, or is it specific to a human rights violation, or is it closer to gay rights? Elijah, go for it.
I accidentally gave you applause as well, Chris, and I stand by it.
I'll take it, Elijah.
Is the answer to this question localized? So there would be a different. So this would occupy a different part of this table in Redfern than what it would to Lingiari.
I think so. I think we'll probably find that it does, and even if it doesn't, it'll be a different part of the, you know what I mean, like the emotion or the threshold will be a little bit different.
Yeah. So would the answer as far as Redfern is concerned have something to do with the status of Redfern and the I mean, and indeed the demographics of Redfern. So all of the voters of Redfern have a greater and more immediate experience of.
Great. So sorry, keep talking. I'm going to write this down while you're saying it. So you're saying the experience of standing at a Redfern booth, voting on The Voice.
That's right.
Different. It's qualitatively different.
That's right. And if you're standing at a Redfern booth, you also live in or around Redfern. Right. And so in your day-to-day life, your everyday experience of this issue is more real, more visible. It's not just something you read about in the newspapers. You have opportunities to you either experience it in your own life every day, or you have opportunities to observe it every day.
Yep. So, and I think that we'll find that is absolutely true between Lingiari and there, just because the size of Lingiari is gigantic. It's enormous. It's enormous size.
It's a quarter of Northern Territory, I think.
Yeah, and Redfern is small. So okay, but there is almost a emotional quotient that Elijah was talking about here, right? Which is closer to like this emotional habitus, and what's the trajectory of a vote in Redfern versus what's the trajectory of a vote in the Northern Territory in Lingiari might be different. So, okay, so, okay, we still don't know where it goes in the box, but we do know, like Elijah was just saying, let's assume Elijah's correct, which I think is a good assessment since he gave me claps, that it is high affect, so it's closer to here. And then the threshold is high. The threshold is high. So let's just say high affect, high threshold, just for the purpose of workshopping this a little bit more. So, okay, so now if it is high emotion, high threshold, okay, then let's go back. The next question then is, what was the penalty that the threshold is meant to alleviate, right? What is it protecting me from as Albo, right? That's the issue, right? So in this case, we go back to the thing and it says, if Albo had lost, would Albo, here's a question, would Albo still be prime minister if he had lost Redfern?
Probably.
Go, Declan, go for it.
I'd imagine, like, in terms of, like, I mean, it would put more, I mean, I think given the sort of his recent mandate, like, or the more recentness of his mandate, it probably wouldn't have necessarily lost his position, but it probably would have brought into question his initiatives as such in terms of, what was the appeal, and the penalties would have been a lot more significant on Albo had it lost in that sense. So I guess, like, yeah, it would have been a massive, like, a high threshold enough.
So who announced the voice, the referendum? Albo. And whose district is the electorate is Redfern in? It's a part of the Greater Sydney, which is Albo. And who's the prime minister? Albo. And we think Albo would have kept his job if he had lost the booth of Redfern after announcing the voice, calling for it on election night as sort of the most emotional part of his election night speech. I'm just positing the question because I think things would be very different if he had lost Redfern.
Can I disagree there, Chris?
Totally.
Only because they don't show results on a suburb by suburb basis, only on electorate basis. So it would have been kind of hard for the mainstream public to see that they lost Redfern. It would have been different if he actually lost Sydney as a whole, which would have been much more rare because it's a wealthy electorate.
Hypothetically speaking, though, like, if they were able to ascertain some of, like, there would be some, divisional breakdown in the results, though, at some level, even if it was just sort of an afterthought sort of thing. And that probably, I mean, by that time, yeah, okay, the salience would have gone from the referendum at that point, so there's less pressure on Albo to resign. But I mean, it would still have some considerable, like, change. The fact his constituents doesn't back him on one of his most major reforms. So
I mean, the fact is, if he'd lost Redfern, he would have lost Sydney. So that may be more of the relationship there. I just want to float this out. It's 5:36. I'm mindful on time. I want to keep moving. But I think when we're looking at penalties, does this make sense of the way we're talking about it? Who's the policy entrepreneur? What's the penalty that they face? Would that motivate them to be more likely to do it? Do they have any relationship to a high affect, high threshold event? And so now we come back to our thesis statement, right? So we've got, yeah, we can do it, but we can do it by, let me do this real quick. 1 second. I'm just going to copy this. I will, distribute all of the slides in the, what's it called? In the Canvas site. So let's just do this for a second. Okay. So, okay, let's do discussion section, affect. We were doing emotional habitus, right? I'll do this screen in what color is good? What do people pick? Give me a color.
Purple.
Sparkle? Where's that? Yellow? Okay, we'll do
No,
it.
purple.
Purple. Sorry, Ananya. Sorry.
Yeah,
Purple. Okay, can people, is that too dark? Okay, that's too dark. Sorry. Okay, I'll fix this. Okay, we're gonna be boring and do yellow. Okay, so we've got emotional habitus, and I need to find the readings on this, and we know we can look at Deborah Gould because she's in the thing, and we know we can look at Bordur. I'll circulate some more readings on emotional habitus. And then we get to what's the highest level of critical analysis? So how critical am I being? Okay, we'll come back to it. What's the role of power? Who gets power with a yes vote? Who gets power with a yes vote? Who gets power with a yes vote? Ananya?
Yeah.
In
I was
Redford.
thinking maybe the Prime Minister gets more power.
I think that's right. Okay, so Prime Minister gets power, and or you could more broadly say the people in power, right? Keep power. Okay, salience. We've looked at this in class. I think you all can do it. What's the role of power with salience? Go for it, Declan.
So like role of power essentially in terms of how much like sort of traction sort of able you're supposed to you be able to get around a focusing event like the referendum as such. So sort of being able to really gain a lot of attention in the Redfern community in terms of on the issue of the referendum, how relevant it is, how permeant it is, especially in the media context, versus other
Yeah.
competing sort of concerns. So maybe not. I'm still trying to familiarize myself with all these.
If it was me and I was doing salience, I would really lean on the article from this week, the one on shark bites and comparing it with like in the notation about the 9/11, because Gaza, I mean, what they say, it was like 10 9/11s or whatever you know what I mean? Like it was that level of things. So I would add in focusing event with Gaza, right? So now you're looking at the relationship between the referendum and a focusing event that happened with Gaza. Is that reasonable? Okay, so the salience it's high in Redfern, but it's not universal. There's a lot going on. Who gets power when Gaza takes salience away from the voice?
Essentially would be the sort of the heads of the campaign like Jacinta Price.
The no campaign. Is that reasonable? I need a few more yeses or nos from people. Declan's doing a great job here, but I need a little bit more people. So we'll say no. I can't see voice no. Okay. Does that make sense to folks? We only have about 10 more minutes and we'll get out of here. So policy entrepreneurship, lean on the theory. Who do we think our policy entrepreneur is in this story?
Is there somebody
Albo?
called
We said Albo. Sorry, go for it. Who's that? Hi, is that Wing Kong?
I don't know. I thought like in the previous slide that you wrote somebody named Price from Redfern.
Oh, we did. We talked about her as the no vote one and in Albo as the
Yes.
basically the yes vote because he's the local area of Redfern as well. So who gets power if Albo is correct on the yes vote?
Gets the power himself.
Albo does, yeah. So Albo gets power for Albo. Okay. And we've got the literature on this. We saw there's been quite a bit. Maybe I'll circulate a little bit more. Then you've got this last one here, calls a story. What is is it intentional or accidental? And if so, what are we talking about? Was the voice intentional or accidental?
Well, the voice was intentional. And I mean, in terms of it was a campaigned on issue at the last election, and it was heavily sort of promoted by the Labour Party. So yeah, I would definitely go with in terms of it was intentional.
Okay, all right, good. So let's, no, I'm sorry, I just lost you all. So let's say that it is, can you see me still? I just lost my screen. Oh, there you're back. Okay, 1 second. But you can see me? Is that a yes?
Yep, I can see it. Yep.
Thank you. So we're gonna say intentional. And I think this is where the PM's election night speech comes in, right? Go for it, Declan.
I do apologize. I should have probably asked this before you started on this one. In regards to the last one, I was when you said identify roles of power of a policy entrepreneur, I tend to go for a nuanced answer given the fact, and I know this is just specifically Redfern has to limit around that, but given sort of disequilibrium between other parts of Sydney and other parts of Australia and everything like that, that sort of Redfern sticking its neck out in support of the yes vote has also an impact in terms of giving some sense of power to the opposition as such, or to the no campaign, because it's sort of like I can't really go to think of a good analogy, but
Okay, I'm gonna cut you off there because you made a really important point that I want everyone to hear. And it sort of ties on to what Elijah said before. Elijah, are you still here? And Dylan was saying it. So it's sort of the three of you. We were talking about the importance of Redfern, right? So what you basically have argued is that there was more emotional labor in having to vote yes on Redfern than maybe anywhere else, because it is this important historical landmark site for the voice. Is that reasonable?
yeah, that's
So,
reasonable. Yeah.
okay, I need you to mute. You're getting a lot of background noise from you, Declan. Somebody, where am I? It's not you, Declan. Who's doing it? I'm looking. Who is it? Do you hear that?
I do. I think it's the one with it's a pink background on it. I don't know. Just mute everyone.
Can't find it. Oh, I have another whole thing. Okay, now it's quieted. Okay, okay. Can everyone see me still? Good. So if we just went up here for a second, right? And we had emotional oppression, emotional taxation, and I think it would be definitely more emotional taxation to vote yes. And more emotional labor to vote yes. So in Redfern, right? That's the box we're talking about. In Redfern. And emotional taxation, remember, is also collective or individual. And remember, the ask is you gotta close you're killing me here with how do I mute everyone? How do I mute it? I can't see how to do it. We've got to mute. Okay, nope, it wants me to stop recording. That's not what I'm doing. 1 second. No. I don't know how to do it. Okay, well, we're almost done. So we've added emotional taxation and emotional labor. And we've looked at Albo as a policy entrepreneur, and we've looked at the background in Redfern, and we've looked at potential causal stories, I'm using the election night speech here as a key one. I don't know, I haven't looked at it lately, but I know it's a biggie. And there are obviously other causal stories. So there's a little bit more work to be done there. But how do people feel? Do they feel like they've got some ideas they can take with them into doing their paper? Okay, let's do an exercise. I'm going to stop sharing. How do I stop? Where am I? There I am. Okay, if you feel like you know what you're going to do for affect, I want thumbs up from everybody. Thumbs up, thumbs up. You know what you're doing on affect. Thumbs up. I see one. Okay, yeah. Okay, come on. I need a few more. Okay, thanks, Basri. Okay. Okay, if you feel more about, okay, I'll come down now. If you feel like you're better on salience, put your thumbs up. Okay, we got some work to do on salience. Okay, all right, that's not bad. Okay, now I want thumbs up on policy entrepreneur. How do we feel about policy entrepreneur? You all have the policy entrepreneur, so I want to see all the thumbs up. Good. And, you know, in On Causal Story, we just talked about really looking at Albo's speech. So maybe we'll watch some of it next week in class. Would that be helpful? Okay,
Yeah,
good. All right.
it's just the intricacies around the causal story. Sorry, it's just understanding that because it
Look
is
at the four things, right? It adjusts the power dynamic, it allocates blame, and it does those four things that are in the
in
slide.
the lecture.
Yeah. So we'll talk about that next week. What I'd really like everyone to do is to jot down some notes right now while it's fresh, so that you will get a better mark on this paper if you write down right now what your ideas are. So affect, emotion, you could do emotional taxation, emotional habitus, or emotional labor. That's sort of what we came down to. Because voting in Redfern is an emotional price to bear for the Indigenous community and everyone in that booth. Then the second is salience, which is a little bit trickier, but it's that's where you reference the reading with the focusing event, right? That was the focusing event with Gaza. So we've got that. And then we look at Google Trends. And then 3, we've got policy entrepreneurship. And we basically agreed that Jacinta Price is on the no campaign and Albo is on the yes campaign. And then on Causal Story, we're going to look at the speech. Is that pretty reasonable? That gives us a lot to work with.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's very reasonable.
And I'll post the slides and the announcement right after this is finished. Okay. Feel okay? Feel reasonable?
Lot more. Yeah.
Good. All right. Great job, everyone. Thanks everyone for being here. We had 36 people here. That's great. Have a good rest of the day. Good job this week.
Will you share those slides around, Chris?
What was that?
Will you share those slides
Yeah,
around?
yeah, I'm gonna post them right now.
Yeah, lovely.
I'll
Thanks,
email
mate.
them. You'll get an announcement.
Thanks a lot.
Everybody, have a good day.
Thanks, Chris.
Cheers.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you.